turn back time, we can't. It's 21 minutes to 5 on this Wednesday, May Day afternoon, coming up at 5 o'clock. Martin Bailey is here with your news programme right through till 7, and then taking it up then is Tiffany Truscott, 7 through till 10. Fascinating things, lighthouses. I love them, and we talk a lot about them here on the afternoon show because they are fascinating. Loads of authors write about them, loads of people experience them, and two people who experience them now. Anyway, nice to meet you both.
Nice to meet you.
Now, what are you doing?
Well, that's a good question. We're definitely enjoying ourselves, if that's one thing we're doing.
Why did you pick on lighthouses?
They're just really nice pieces of architecture, part of our history.
Yeah, and so what is the idea behind it? To visit every single one in Cornwall?
Yeah. Definitely. To try and get a lot of information about each of those lighthouses and sort of help people to learn more about lighthouses.
Yeah, because they are there, they are with us, and they've been around, and there's a huge amount of history attached to them.
Yeah.
But very few people have ever been in one.
Yeah, so at Lizard Lighthouse, they have a heritage centre, and you can actually go on a tour and you can go up inside the lighthouse.
Oh, fantastic. So I didn't know there was quite so many. So where have you been?
There's I think 8 in total on the shore around Cornwall. Or just offshore, yeah.
So,
and we have actually pretty much visited them all now, haven't we?
Yeah, so there's Pendine, Lizard, Wolf Rock,
Longships,
Tater Du.
Where's Tater Du?
That's like near Lamorna.
Oh, I love the name.
It's the driver.
If you go down to Lamorna Cove, and then it's just a bit south past there. It's a beautiful bit of the coast.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Have you fallen in love a bit more with the whole Cornish coast and lighthouse idea?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was all through the winter mostly, sort of going out and going to all these places when the waves were crashing over. It's beautiful.
And a word you'll hear a lot in the series is rugged, I think.
Bring it back.
And then go to uni.
Maybe.
Maybe.
We'll see.
Well done. Nice to see you both. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having us.
Brilliant.
That's T, and then any position.
Yes.
And then I. H. T. O is that one. That one. And then F is that one again. One like that.
Then ready position.
And then C. What? That. Then L is like that twice.
Historically, lighthouses have played an incredibly important role across these coastlines. With Falmouth just across the bay, this was one of the deepest harbours in the world. With boats coming in, day out, what we needed was a lighthouse. I'm Rosalind Williams.
I'm Sebastian, Rowan-Austin.
And this is Lighthouses of Cornwall.
I do know, it's that what a stranded sailor wants to see is not a darkened coast, it's a lighthouse.
We're here at the former paraffin store for the St. Anthony's Lighthouse. The light for the lighthouse originally came from 8 argand oil lamps. These oil lamps burnt with more complete combustion than other lamps of the day, and so the wick had to be trimmed less frequently.
These Wix lamps were replaced with pressurised vapour lamps, which were more updated technology. but then in 1954 they were replaced again with modern electric lights. In 1987 the house was fully automated. Before St Anthony's Lighthouse, a red flag was flown here from an elm tree to warn people out to sea. But that was taken down in 1779 to avoid being used by invading fleets.
This lighthouse also had the heaviest fog warning bell in Cornwall, but this was removed in 1854 and donated to the local church. The heaviest fog warning bell in Cornwall was removed from St Anthony Lighthouse in 1854 and taken to the church here. It would have been here now, but it was removed and melted down.
From St Anthony's, we travelled across the bay to Falmouth to visit Cornwall's Maritime Museum. This isn't any old library. It's full of books, periodicals, archives and other reference material specialising on Cornwall's rich maritime heritage.
We're here at the National Maritime Museum in Cornwall to go to the Bartlett Library.
Let's see what we can find.
With some 18,000 volumes available to peruse, this seemed like the perfect place to glean little-known facts about both the lighthouses in Cornwall and also details about the shipwrecks that they tried so hard to prevent.
As you can see, that fog warning bell weighed 2 tons, imagine that.
Yeah, and 1.5 metres, that is huge.
It really is. But it consumed 10 shillings worth of fuel each night.
That is quite
It's very costly.
All these fishes nice.
They're very funny, aren't they?
The tower at the top of the museum is much like that of a lighthouse's lens room. As well as giving a great view of Falmouth's buzzing and picturesque harbour, it also gives an indication of the type of range the light from a lighthouse would have.
Yeah, so what it is it is on a 15-second cycle.
Yeah. Yes,
I just timed it. Just an isophase. Because I've timed the length that it's on. And the length that it's off as well, and it's 7.5 each.
But it's not all serious. Many people will have been introduced to St Anthony's Lighthouse through the hit children's TV series Fraggle Rock, which was described by the creator Jim Henson himself as a high-energy, raucous musical romp. It debuted in 1983, but it's still popular today. And it follows the fictional society of Fraggles, small furry creatures who are said to have lived at St Anthony's Lighthouse.
We're here at Trevose Lighthouse.
It's not Trevose Lighthouse.
We're here at Godrevy Lighthouse, one of the most famous lighthouses in the world.
When Virginia Woolf visited this lighthouse in her early life, it was her favourite lighthouse to sign the visitor's book at.
That very same visitor's book sold by Bonhams in 2011 for more than £10,000.
A lighthouse such as this one would require constant maintenance, and so it was imperative to have at least 2 lighthouse keepers
on site at any one time. Now, if you had 4 lighthouse keepers, as Trinity House did, you would find yourself constructing a rota in which each lighthouse keeper was on the island for 2 months and then off the island for 1 month.
Can you see, just sort of to the centre of the island, there's some strange sort of blue things there.
Oh, that's true. But they do look a bit like they could just be wheelie bins. But hang on, just to the right of them, there's some solar panels. It must be solar powered.
The original oil lamp was turned by a clockwork system which had to be hand wound. It had weights which hung between the walls of the lighthouse. A fixed red lamp was mounted directly below the main one, which had a range of 15 miles, while the main lamp had a range of 17 miles.
In 2012, the light in the lighthouse was extinguished and replaced by a new LED lamp which was installed down on the rocks. This makes the actual building of the lighthouse completely redundant and disused.
That must have been what the solar panels were for. It was a dark and stormy night here on the 30th of November 1854 when the steamship Nile ran aground with the loss of all 40 lives on board.
This renewed calls for a lighthouse to be built here at Godrevy, and the mariner Richard Short is quoted as saying,
"Scarcely a month passes by in the winter season without some vessel striking on these rocks, and hundreds of poor fellows have perished there in the dark, dreary nights, without one being left to tell the tale."
The petition was successful in 1856, and in just 3 years, the lighthouse here at Godrevy was completed.
Before the days of radio signal, how would a lighthouse keeper transmit a signal to the mainland in stormy seas? The answer lies in semaphore, a system which used pointers, rods, discs, paddles, or even flags, as we have here, in different positions to convey a message.
But what to call this new method of communication? In 1801 or 1793, it was the Frenchman Claude Chappe who sought inspiration from our fathers of antiquity. Combining the word sema, which in ancient Greek means sign, and the word pharaoh, meaning I bear or I carry, the word semaphore was born.
It was in Napoleonic times that semaphore was first used. With swinging rods on top of small huts creating the positions, operators then copied them and retransmitted them to the next hut. However, it was only the superintendents at the end of each line who had the code to find out what these secret messages actually meant. The operators had no idea. However, nowadays, anyone can easily use and understand semaphore messages. Many young people enjoy using short slang words in semaphore, as we have done here.
Ready? Yo! Ready?
Ready? Sup? And then make it really good.
Yeah.
Camera rolling.
I'm going to do that.
We've ventured to the most reptilianly named part of Cornwall.
This is the Lizard Lighthouse.
The lighthouse behind me was built in 1751 and although there was a lighthouse on the site before that, there are no records of what it might have looked like.
It was very difficult for Sir John Killigrew of Arwenack in Falmouth to get the patent for that first lighthouse. This is because the local community here actually benefited from plundering the wrecks that littered these coastlines.
Originally, there were 2 lighthouses here with a keeper's cottage in between. The keeper would lay on a sort of couch in the cottage with a window on either side. He would there command a view of both lanterns.
In 1845, 3 new cottages were added to the complex. Imagine the amount of lighthouse keepers you could have had here. But actually, these lighthouse cottages weren't residential. They were instead used for a new fog signal and for electricity.
The rocks behind me are some of the most treacherous in the whole of southern Cornwall.
Eventually, Sir John Killigrew did manage to get a patent for a lighthouse here on the Lizard. However, the upkeep became very expensive. His solution was to charge passing sailors a fee to help with the upkeep. However, they simply weren't willing to pay.
That's sailors for you. He soon became bankrupt and the tower was demolished. These rocks are almost as treacherous as Sir John Killigrew.
He wasn't treacherous. He was a philanthropic pirate, I'll have you know.
Gosh!
I am currently the most southerly person in mainland Britain. Behind me is the English Channel, one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. In the early 1900s, an underwater bell with very important purposes was set up about 2 miles off the coast from here. It was operated using an electronic striker from the lighthouse using an underwater submarine cable.
The lighthouse itself has a focal height of 70 metres. That gives it a range of 26 nautical miles, which is 48 kilometres for the metrics among you. Behind me is a whopping pair of compressed air foghorns.
Nowadays, an electronic foghorn is used. However, this historic pair is still used for special occasions. Wouldn't it be amazing to go to the Isles of Scilly?
Home to some of the best lighthouses in the world. This is something that's got me very excited. It's an early hand-powered foghorn. Lighthouse keepers would have wound the big handle round using these pistons via the connecting rods to compress the air into this huge tank. They could then have used the lever to pull it down and issue a piercing blow of sound out to sea. Just like that.
Have a look at Hathor. Birdport. Today we've come to the Lizard Lighthouse Heritage Centre, and we've already learnt that one of Britain's greatest exports is cheddar cheese. Here's a short demonstration to show exactly how a lighthouse keeper would have sounded the foghorn. First, filling up the air chambers. Then you press the button to send the air to the diaphone.
coming, I'm coming. Oh, they left me behind.
9.2 miles behind us is Wolf Rock Lighthouse.
Built between 1861 and 1870 and electrified in 1955.
It was so difficult to be accessed by boat that they realised that it needed to be able to be reached by helicopter. So in 1972, it became the world's first lighthouse with a helipad.
The house was automated in 1988, which reduced the need for access, but its helipad makes it iconic to this day.
In 1791, a 20-foot day mark was constructed on Wolf Rock, but it was decimated within 4 years.
In 1840, a beacon was put on the site, but that was washed away within a year.
In 1842, another beacon was constructed, but this was demolished in 2 years.
In 1848, the final beacon was built, and that one is still there today. The 3,000 tonnes of granite required was prepared according to the Eddystone dovetail system in the local Penzance. This was transported to the island in heavy-duty barges.
It was so difficult to get these transportation barges close enough to Wolf Rock that there were only 302 construction hours available in 5 years.
Lighthouses have different colourings and markings depending on the background that they'll be visible against.
If a lighthouse has a dark, black or wooded background, it will often be white in colour, such as Tater Du.
Against an imposing white chalky background, such as the one in Dover, lighthouses might be given red stripes to help them stand out.
If you had a background in football, you might find yourself wanting to colour your lighthouse blue to support your local football team, as residents of Margate campaigned for.
Something quite iconic about that traditional red and white stripe though, I think.
There is, I really like it.
Shall we go and build one?
Yes! Let's! Oh, I'm so excited to build this lighthouse.
Oh, we could do loads of painted stripes.
So I'm just test running the lighthouse here. It's feeling very good indeed. I'd say excellent craftsmanship went into this. It's very difficult as we're here on an island to take the supplies over from the mainland by zip wire. But other than that, it went very smoothly.
The optimum height for a lighthouse is 238 feet above MHW, as mean high water. From this height, a lighthouse can be seen for up to 50 miles out to sea.
In order to reach this optimum height, lighthouses at the bottom of cliffs are tall, while lighthouses at the top of cliffs are short.
The challenge for early lighthouse builders was how to ensure that the lighthouse was built at the optimum height above sea level. If the light was too high, then it couldn't be seen and would shine out over the heads of passing sailors.
However, if the lighthouse was too short, faraway sailors simply wouldn't be able to see the light from the lighthouse. This is because the Earth is round, much like this apple here.
Here's a lighthouse.
As the ship sails further away from the lighthouse simply retreats behind the horizon.
If the Earth was flat, like this picnic table, a bright enough lighthouse could be seen from infinitely far away.
We've adventured through the murky depths of North Cornwall to come here to one of England's most rugged and dramatic coastlines, Trevose.
I think this is one of the best lighthouses we've seen yet this series.
It's so majestic. Here we can clearly see a fantastic version of the Trinity House coat of arms. You can also see the Latin motto, Trinitas in Unitate. Translated into modern English, this is Trinity in Unity.
The lighthouse here has stood strong against the fierce Atlantic gales for almost 2 centuries.
Hopefully it will stand for many more. In 1911, Trinity House installed a massive trumpet here, measuring a staggering 36 feet long.
This was the brainchild of Lord Rayleigh.
It lasted until 1963, when a much less interesting foghorn was installed.
Despite the infamous sea mists which frequently engulf this headland, the foghorn was also deemed unnecessary and was silent as recently as 2012, just 6 years ago. The main structure was built in 1847. However, a single light was considered ambiguous to shipping and a second light was built. This would have stood around here.
These 2 lights would have guided shipping into the Bristol Channel. Perhaps they were being fussy, but this second light was deemed unnecessary and was removed in 1882 after just a few years' service.
You know, I'd really like to be a lighthouse keeper.
Me too. I think it would be a really fantastic way to fuel the solitary existence and get really lonely for a really long time.
Just to appreciate that view. I mean, you could just sit there and watch it for hours and hours.
Absolutely, and even centuries depending on how long you lived for.
You know, I think one of our researchers told me that the builders had to spend several months cutting this road into the cliff before they could even begin to build the lighthouse.
That is devotion and a really long time. A catadioptric optical lens was installed here in 1913 and produced 1 red flash every 5 seconds from an incandescent sphere.
We see today that it now flashes with white light every 7.5 seconds. This has been the case since it was changed in 1995. These gales proved to be a real headache for the builders, Jacob and Thomas Oliver of Falmouth, when the scaffolding they were using completely blew away.
The fussiness continued as the Fresnel lens for the lighthouse was so specialised that it had to be imported all the way from Paris. Lighthouses have saved countless lives from the treacherous rocks, reefs and headlands that make up these coastlines. But what is it that saves ships when it's foggy?
Just as lighthouses can be identified by the unique flashing patterns that they emit, so too can they be identified by the sounds from their foghorns.
Ba 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 ba.
Quite.
But it isn't just fog horns that are used. Early fog warning signals were simple bells or gongs. At some lighthouses, small cannons were fired at intervals to prevent ships from approaching. Trinity House was a great fan of this explosive signalling method, despite it being both labour intensive and often damaging to the lighthouse windows. One lighthouse keeper at Fort Amherst was reportedly blasted to the other side of the room by a fog cannon. In the US of A, fog whistles were also used where steam power was available. Nowadays, older foghorns have been replaced by electrically powered diaphragms or compressed air horns. They also save energy. A laser beam is emitted out to sea, and if it reflects off a ship and returns, only then is the electronic horn activated. So the foghorn only sounds if there is a ship at sea that it needs to warn.
Have you ever noticed why high notes such as this don't travel as far as low notes such as this?
Well, it's all thanks to the Scotsman Robert Fowlis, who emigrated to St. John in Canada. It is said that he heard his daughter playing the piano from far away on a foggy night, and he found that the lowest notes were the most audible at a distance.
We've ventured to Land's End. This was once thought to be the end of the world, as it is the most westerly point in mainland Britain.
Just 1.25 miles off the coast here lies our next lighthouse, Longships. In 1795, the first tower was built here. Keepers received £30 a year and had to cook their meals on the argand lamps used for the light itself.
Although this first tower was 24 metres high, in high seas it was submerged by water. So between 1869 and 1873, a new tower was constructed which was 35 metres high. The second tower was built by James Douglas, who also constructed the famed 4th Eddystone Lighthouse.
The build cost was a whopping £44,000. During a huge storm in 1901, the supply boats were cut off and the keepers stranded.
The people of England were concerned about the welfare of the lighthouse keepers, but after the storm they found that the lighthouse keepers had in fact got enough supplies.
Their only hardship was a complete lack of tobacco, and the keepers had taken to smoking coffee, hops and tea leaves. We're here at Carmarth. We've come to see a very special lighthouse. This lighthouse has not been around long, but in its short lifespan has sparked joy and amusement. We're here to see the Rosalind Lighthouse.
Lighthouses don't usually beam out in Morse code. However, I'm a very talkative lighthouse, and I was using it to express myself. Dip, 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 dip.
It's sad to think that with rising sea levels, many of our historically important lighthouses could be lost forever.
Ah!
Du, Cornwall's most recently built lighthouse.
Following the sinking of a small Spanish coaster, the Juan Ferret, in 1963, with the tragic loss of 11 lives, the Newlyn and Mousehole Fishermen's Association petitioned Trinity House for a new lighthouse.
Within 2 years, this lighthouse was constructed, and in summer of 1965, it was opened by the Duke of Gloucester.
Now what strikes me is the fact that no one ever actually lived in this lighthouse. It was fully automated from the start.
I think that's the design of Michael Crisp.
Talking of which, shall we have a crisp?
Go on. Thanks. Uses a foghorn.
In her seminal novel To the Lighthouse, Virginia Woolf gives a relatively accurate account of the lifestyle of a lighthouse keeper. She describes them as poor fellows who must be bored to death, sitting all day with nothing to do but polish the lamp and trim the wick and rake about on their scrap of garden, something to amuse them.
But this depiction is perhaps a little bleak. Lighthouse keepers could do puzzles, play board games, they could fish, they could do exercise by running around the lighthouse, or they could whittle birds.
I heard there was one lighthouse keeper.
He had to run around the lighthouse
56 times!
to make a complete mile.
The first lighthouse in England to get a full-time lighthouse keeper was the South Foreland Lighthouse near Dover, and this was in 1730, a very long time ago.
Although lighthouses started being automated in the 1960s, most retained their keepers until the 1980s, or even the 1990s. Some lighthouses are now privately owned. In fact, a fellow TV presenter, Jeremy Clarkson, bought the Langness Lighthouse in 2008.
His ex-wife now rents it out as tourist accommodation. I think that would be one of the best places to stay in the world.
Some lighthouse keepers could live in their lighthouse with their families, but in more remote regions, lighthouse keepers often live there alone.
These single occupancy lighthouses were known as stag lights. One of the roles of a lighthouse keeper was keeping the windows clean. Another job of paramount importance was keeping the lens clean.
Another essential part of lighthouse keeping was trimming the wick.
indeed.
During the 19th century, Gurnard's Head developed a reputation as a treacherous wrecking spot. With Trinity House increasingly concerned about the dangers, they decided to build a lighthouse in 1891.
Imagine being a ship at sea on a night like this.